You're not dead unless the Fox sisters say so. Many have tried to pin down spiritualism, but in reality, it was much more than just a passing trend. It was ugly, to say the least. The practices back then were not okay. Yet, when two young sisters in the middle of the 1800s claimed to be able to communicate with spirits, they quickly rose to fame as mediums and unintentionally started a pattern of momentum even they couldn't stop. So, does it truly work to resurrect the dead and gamble with the truth of their last moments? Here is how the sisters opened a portal we truly could have avoided. Hey Boo Crew, it's Selena, and welcome to the Haunted Estate. And before we spill the tea, we drink the tea. Yes. One night, the Fox sisters and their supposedly haunted farmhouse became a cultural phenomenon. And since then, things have not been able to get back to normal. As word spread about the unexplained rapping, more and more neighbors showed up to look at the inside of the sisters' room. After a comprehensive inspection, the females were determined to be completely honest. And a few questions after, it was quickly determined that this was the spirit of Charles B. Rosna, a peddler who had been killed in the house a few years earlier. At first, the girls thought Mr. Rosna was indeed the devil. They went as far as to call him Mr. Splitfoot, referring to the cloven hooves of Satan. Yet, upon closer examination, the knocks from the spirit appeared to point to a human soul gone rogue. It was also reported by nosy detectives that under the house they discovered possible belongings of the deceased Mr. Rosna, including bone fragments and personal items. So, as expected, Maggie and Kate were taken to live with family members during all this chaos and the anticipation surrounding the discovery. But the unexplained knocking unexpectedly followed the girls wherever they went. Where, when, did everything go wrong? It was 1848, and before anyone could make sense of it, things went south in Hydesville, New York. At nightfall, a frightened Margaret Fox pulled her neighbor from the house so he could see the terrifying sight that had alarmed her so much. When the neighbor arrived at the farmhouse, Margaret showed her two young daughters, 11-year-old Catherine, Kate Fox, and 15-year-old Margaretta, Maggie Fox. And in their bedrooms, the girl's mother had been receiving bizarre statements from them. After all, seeing their proof, they went straight to a neighbor to verify what she was seeing. The girls claimed that every night noises such as taps, knocks, and rumbles filled their bedroom. The sounds were unnerving, but perhaps so more was the impression that the source could be alive or not. The ghostly noisemaker would knock answers to the girls as they asked questions. The spirit even correctly identified the girls' ages when asked to do so. It provided logical responses to questions. Then, when requested to indicate yes or no with certain numbers of taps, the unidentified went as far as to claim a solid yes when asked if it was the tortured spirit of a murdered soul. It was then that a chain of events would influence spiritual development, both within the outside of the United States and give rise to many of the concepts and customs that today are widely associated with the world of spirits. In 1848, radical new ideas were born in New York. Two prominent individuals, Quakers, Amy and Isaac Post, were involved in many of these bold new ideas. Apart from being strong supporters of freedom and women's rights, the pair had a close relationship with the Fox family. That is why the couple was open to the idea that the two children Kate had moved in with had a special talent, when Leah Fox, the oldest of the two kids, appeared to channel the spirit of the Post family's deceased daughter. The Post turned out to be among some of the earliest advocates of the sisters, reserving theaters and music halls so others could see the amazing sisters and the alleged communication that they had with the dead. Intimate home seances also became popular social gatherings that drew sizable crowds as the Fox sisters' fame increased. Kate, Maggie, and now Leah would speak with the recently departed through noises that appeared to materialize out of thin air, all in front of a stunned crowd. While doubt is a normal response for audiences used to a wide range of frauds and fantastical claims, in 1848 the spiritual abilities of the Fox sisters were sufficiently convincing, enough to draw notable people like Sir Arthur Conan. Kate, Maggie, and Leah's fans even thought the girls had broken through the barrier that separated mankind from the spirit realm. And that is probably one of the reasons why 6 days after his death, on July 13th, 1930, in the middle of his memorial service at London Royal Albert Hall, Arthur Conan Doyle made an appearance, adding to the mystery and intrigue that seemed to be never-ending. Although no one saw him, Estelle Roberts, a spirit medium, gave the attendees the reassurance that Doyle had fulfilled his vow on his deathbed, coming back to provide evidence that communicating with the dead is indeed feasible. And the Fox sisters stood for religious transformation to a great number of their followers, an intellectual growth so immense that it could alter the very essence of humanity. And it wasn't long until an increasing number of people started claiming to be able to communicate with spirits. As a result, spirit mediums gained popularity in rich social circles as both entertainment and a means of spiritual exploration. In many such communities, the mystery and appeal of what could lie beyond, also coupled with the seeming ability that certain gifted people unlocked its riddles, was too much for religious people to withstand. But where was the truth? And when did it begin to bleed into what we now call spiritualism, erasing the boundaries of reality? See, there was plenty of proof that the Foxes' rapping was fake during the first 4 years of their popularity. Some ironically noted how often the ghosts of well-known people like Benjamin Franklin materialized at the Foxes' seances. Another couldn't help but observe that the great man's grasp of grammar and spelling had drastically declined since he'd passed away. Then there were occasions when Franklin and other stiffs chose not to show up at all since the circumstances didn't suit them. Not to mention, cushions were positioned between the girls' feet and the wooden planks during a performance in Buffalo. That night, the only sound in the air was that of the sound of strained stillness. Of course, Leah launched her standard defense. Only people with pure heart and unwavering faith would be able to see conclusive evidence of the girls' abilities, and that the negative energy of cynics contaminated the channel between the girls and the spirits. It was the perfect example of magical thinking and circular logic. And so, driven by the force of self-delusion, spiritualism expanded swiftly through Great Britain, possibly being the initial American cultural export that enslaved the ancient homeland. And in all its irony, Kate was heavily involved with that, putting on performances in which spirits materialized as well through rapping. It's unknown exactly how she accomplished that, but at her seances, visions were reported to manifest in odd psychic light. By then, the mystique of the Fox sisters had heavily captivated the British, just as it had the Americans, and Leah, in particular, benefited from the reputation that crossed the continents. She had been a single mother before the Hydesville rapping, hampered by the widespread social constraints associated with being a born woman. So if one good thing happened that came out of the entire hoax was probably that the women dominated the field of spiritual mediumship, an aspect of entertainment industry that the sisters had especially contributed more than anybody else could even start to create. Spinning into spiritualism also led Leah to have access to opportunities, riches, and social influence that someone from her background would not typically have. She developed into a respected social woman and Wall Street banker's wife during the ensuing decades. She was socially elevated, but spiritualism had become so commonplace that she didn't see the need to disassociate herself from the movement anymore. And then it happened. The rapping craze caused pain and misery for Maggie, the sister who had been burdened with the most performing duties, and who had been disturbed by her own lying from the start. At 17, she met renowned Arctic explorer Elijah Kane in 1852, and the two set off on an oddly tense long-distance romance. Of course, Kane had to strike a balance between his one true love and his humiliation at his lover's lifelong devotion to sideshow pseudoscience. Obviously, Maggie had held on to the hope that she would one day marry him and give up her position as the movement's prophet, believing that she would become Mrs. Elijah Kane. Yet, the most sophisticated members of Philadelphia society, the Kane family, viewed Maggie as a backwoods promoter of vulgar immortality. Before his most recent international trip, Elijah made a compromise on a ring exchange ceremony out of fear of implications of a traditional marriage. He pledged that upon his return, there would be a formal marriage, approved by both God and the law. That day never came. Since Elijah was traveling, he became very ill and passed away in Cuba at the young age of 36. At the same time, Elijah's parents denied Maggie her right to a portion of their son's fortune by refusing to recognize her as their son's common-law wife and engaged, adding insult to injury to her already sorrowful life. Soon after, gathering enough courage to make a public confession in 1888, Maggie had been waiting 40 years after the childhood prank that had altered her whole life. Maggie found it difficult to accept that the cotton reel might spin away from her and that her hands would once drop. Even then, at the Academy of Music in New York, she made a passionate confession that included a detailed explanation of how she and her sister carried out the alleged prank. All these years, no one had appeared to notice that it had been the night of March 31st, the eve of April Fool's Day, when her mother had called the neighbors to report seeing the ghost tap and knock. Margaret admitted in front of the shocked audience that she and Kate had secretly tied an apple to a string and pulled it until it brushed across their bed. So, as the grown-ups started to take the success of their practical joke seriously, pride and foolishness gave way to terror. Stories started to spread about the bones discovered under the Fox residence, about Charles B. Rosna, who went missing. Of course, Rosna had never existed, much less been killed and hidden under their childhood bedroom. Working behind closed doors to polish their pranks, the two sisters enjoyed the attention they were getting and were terrified of what might happen if they didn't continue their ruse. The apple on a string bit would not last long, but the girls soon discovered and developed a unique talent that they had in common. Both sisters could make it popping and cracking noises from their ankle and toe joints with little effort. And so they worked at this skill until they could make distinct noises at a loud enough volume while moving, barely enough for anyone to notice. Kate, who was also a widow with an alcohol addiction, confirmed everything Maggie stated, while sitting in the same audience. Leah, on the other hand, rolled her eyes and dismissed her sisters as shallow attention seekers, who prioritized their materialistic cravings over morality and truth. But even after the shocking confession, spiritualists have long pointed to Maggie's receipt of $1,500 for the performance of the unmistakable, indiscriminating evidence that she was lying that night, and just concerned with money that she would have needed to buy her next dose of alcohol with. Adding to the already very much shakeable foundation of spiritualism, Maggie quickly withdrew her confession, since she understood that doing so would simply result in the loss of her only income. By then, Maggie was also a bitter and damaged woman who would depend on the goodwill of friends and acquaintances to have a roof over her head until she passed away in 1895. But she had been an accidental pioneer of spiritualism in an extremely odd manner. You see, she and her sisters had blazed a trail for dozens of other female spiritualists, many of whom gained financial independence, social standing, and a platform for their gifts, personalities, and aspirations. 20 years before comedians started to give female entertainers a new standing in the American popular culture. Obviously, Maggie was not likely to have been proud of that at all. She felt ashamed of her dependency on spiritualism and tarnished by her involvement in it till her final day. Then again, the spiritualist community was most unaffected by her death. There was no memorial seance held in her honor, unlike the one they held for Doyle, and no spirit medium to interpret her soul's message. Naturally, the story of the Fox sisters, like many great ghost stories, has left us with more what-ifs to consider as we confront the ultimate unknown. Basically, the spiritualist movement, a religion that holds that there is a spirit world, and in certain individuals that can communicate with the deceased, was perhaps inspired by the odd ability bestowed upon the Fox sisters. As the number of people claiming to be mediums and being able to communicate with the dead has increased over the years, seances gained in popularity across Europe and the United States. Even Queen Victoria used a medium to communicate with her late husband, Prince Albert. She was enthralled by the practice. Robert James Lees, a 13-year-old medium, is said to have demonstrated his ability to communicate with the dead during a seance by addressing Victoria by a pet name that only Albert would have known. Renowned psychic Leslie Flint also claimed that Victoria communicated with her daughter Beatrice from beyond the grave. So even though the Fox sisters had long since passed away, the apparent commercialization of spiritualism persisted until the 1890s. On the flip side of it all, the Ouija board has also made its rounds since the late 19th century. In the 1890s, it is most frequently connected to the spiritualist movement. Although the Fox sisters did not invent or use the Ouija board directly, their actions helped fuel the growing interest in spiritualism at the time, giving Charles Kennard this sense of purpose that maybe the sisters lacked. Now, for those of you who are unaware, the Ouija board's idea was to give people a way to communicate with the ghosts by using a planchette to write messages on the board that was covered in numbers and letters. It gained popularity as a conversational game. See, Charles Kennard was neither the best nor the luckiest businessman, but he was always looking for ways to earn a profit. He didn't seem to be the most honest person either. After seeing some initial success, a combination of debt, competition, and drought forced his Chesterton factory to go to auction. Yet everything was not lost. A German immigrant with the name of E.C. in Chestertown's small business center, Riche maintained an office on the first level of a 40-story wood-framed hotel next to Kennard's. Riche was an eager tinkerer and had been a furniture maker, coffin maker, and undertaker. Not an unusual job or path in the times, but it was Kennard who had other ideas. Newspaper articles concerning a talking board craze that was taking over Ohio during the time. One such article was published by the Associated Press and appeared to be on the local Kent County News. Around this same time period, another Baltimore American report claims that Kennard and Riche started working together, creating at least a dozen of their own talking boards, possibly as a result of the AP article piece. And after multiple rejections and no investment at first, Elijah Bond, a local attorney who believed his sister-in-law was a strong medium, finally expressed some interest. Soon after, the Kennard Novelty Company, which was founded 125 years ago on Halloween, started producing Ouija boards, in a manner largely similar to what they are now. Bond was also correct about his sister-in-law Helen Peters, who was able to persuade the US Patent Office to accept Kennard's new talking board compellingly. She receives recognition on both receiving the OUIGA name and the board itself, which informed by her that the weird term actually signifies the word good luck, and for obtaining the federal government seal of legality, attesting to the board's delivery as promised. It's true that Kennard, an undertaker and businessman, created the only patented board game that has even outsold Monopoly in a single year. The game was marketed as a magical oracle for communication with the dead, as well as a healthy form of entertainment. As we all know, don't do that. But the narrative of the Ouija board goes beyond a tale of snake oil merchants and manipulating the Victorian public, or later on an innocent game played at a million sleepovers for junior high students. Although it's still a surprisingly persistent pop culture phenomenon linked to the emergence of horror films and the paranormal industrial complex, it's a narrative that also explores the history of psychology, the advancement of neuroscience, and the universal yearning to discover the answers to life's most important questions. And honestly, it has always been a board game, or a parlor game, but for some individuals, it has been more than that. Like to me. You all know how I feel about the Ouija board. Some of you think it's a fun game. Anything that helps you connect to the other side can be dangerous, so I'll always warn against it. But back in time, people thought a lot differently. You see, people's views on dying in the 19th century were very different from ours. They were far more in line with daily experiences. These days, we make every effort to delay aging, much less entertain genuine thoughts of passing away. Yet the average lifespan in the 1800s was only 50 years old, where 6 of the 12 children that mothers had would pass away. So it should come as no surprise that Ouija's origin narrative contains a few dark corners. And why not? When money's involved, there's always going to be some element of it. And by the early 1890s, over 2,000 Ouija boards were being sold every single week. Not to forget, after this, his brother was fired from the company. William Fuld, who had worked for and invested in the Kennard Novelty Company, finally took over the Ouija business after its founder crashed out too soon. Fuld went on to make millions of dollars producing the board in Baltimore and other locations. Tragically, William Fuld would also experience a terrible accident at his Hartford Avenue business, which he claimed the Ouija board had instructed him to build in 1919. He was supervising the placement of a flag when the iron railing came away, causing him to tumble off the building's roof, which is still intact and is now a complex of senior apartments. While he was dying with a shattered rib that had penetrated his heart, he vowed to his children that they would never betray the family by selling them out to the Ouija. Naturally, Fuld's family did sell, but not for 40 years, to Parker Brothers, who swiftly relocated Ouija to its headquarters in Salem, Massachusetts. In 1967, the company sold 2 million boards in its inaugural year in the town that's known for its witch trials. Yet, when the Kennard Novelty Company, the first makers of the Ouija board, were founded, nobody had the intention of opening the gates of hell. Rather, their main goal was to open American wallets, just as it was for the Fox sisters when they originally started. But regardless of what transpired over the course taken by the Fox sisters, we remain fascinated with the idea of communicating with ghosts through Ouija boards, watching spooky films, and sharing ghost stories. Whether or not you believe in ghosts, you know I believe. You all know I've seen and heard things that I will never be able to explain. Communicating with the spirit world is a serious task. You should always be in the right state of mind and protect yourself, because that cute little girl ghost talking to you is rarely a cute little girl ghost. If given the chance, would you ever try to tap into the world of the unknown? Let me know in the comments below. And for more such mystery into the unknown, hit that like and subscribe button. And join me here at the Haunted Estate. Stay spooky, Boo Crew. Doyle also believed in I don't know the word.
Telepathy.
Doyle also believed in telepathy.
Telepathy.
Okay, scroll down. Telepathy. Okay.
Is this a thing for you to do?
You just practice makes perfect, bitch. Let's go.
Okay.
But where was the truth? And when did it bleed into what we now call spiritualism?